Hi guys and welcome to Calm Night Radio channel. Tonight we step into Alabama in 1840, where the air feels thick enough to sip and the sky hangs low over cotton fields, like a great dark blanket waiting to fall. You arrive at the edge of a plantation just as the first wind begins to stir the leaves, and everything seems to pause in that strange, breath-held moment before rain. What was a place like this at night, when the work was ending, the lamps were lit, and thunder rolled beyond the pines? What did comfort mean here, and for whom? So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And while you're here, comment with your location and local time. Now dim the lights, and let yourself drift into the wet summer evening, where the red clay road is warm underfoot. The scent of pine sap and damp cotton rises softly around you, and the first drops begin tapping on the leaves with patient little fingers. You come in with the evening, when the plantation is neither fully busy nor truly at rest. The last of the daylight clings to the sky in a pale silver band, while the clouds above it gather in folds of blue, grey and charcoal. The land around you stretches wide and low, broken by rows of cotton, kitchen gardens, split-rail fences, stands of oak and pine, and the muddy paths that stitch the whole place together. Alabama in 1840 is still a young state, restless and growing, its wealth tied tightly to cotton and to the labour forced from enslaved people. That is the plain fact of the place, even when the rain softens every outline and makes the scene look almost gentle. You feel the weather first on your skin. The air is warm, but the wind has turned cooler, carrying that rich smell of wet leaves and distant water. There is a sweetness to it, not candy sweet, not flower sweet, but earth sweet. The scent that rises when dry dust prepares to surrender. Your sleeve brushes against a rough wooden gate, and the wood feels swollen from older storms. Somewhere nearby, a mule shifts in its harness and snorts, as if deeply offended by the whole arrangement. Fair enough, really. Few creatures admire a southern thunderstorm when they are standing in it. Ahead, the main house stands slightly raised, its pale walls faint in the dim light. A broad porch wraps around part of it, with columns that try very hard to look grand in the fading dusk. Tall windows hold the last gleam of the sky. Lamps begin to bloom inside, one by one, soft amber dots behind glass. Plantation houses varied in size and style, but many prosperous owners in the cotton belt wanted homes that showed stability and rank. Even from a distance, you can see the performance of it all: order, refinement, control. The house seems to say these things without speaking, yet the storm is not especially impressed. A low rumble moves through the ground before it reaches your ears. Thunder rolls from far off, not sharp yet, but broad and heavy, like a cart crossing a wooden bridge somewhere beyond the horizon. The cicadas keep singing for a moment, then thin out. Frogs begin in the wetter places near a ditch. A flock of small birds cuts low across the field and disappears into a cluster of trees. Everyone, human and animal alike, seems to understand that night will arrive under rain. The plantation is a small world with many separate worlds inside it. Near the house, activity continues in a quieter, more measured way. You glimpse white family members and household servants moving through lamplight. Someone closes shutters on the side facing the storm. Someone else carries in linens from a line before they can be soaked. From an open kitchen window comes the smell of cornmeal, onions, and wood smoke, mixed with roasting meat and something buttery from the main table. The scent drifts warmly over the yard, almost cozy enough to fool the senses. Almost. A little farther off stand the outbuildings, each with its own function and smell. The smokehouse carries salt, ash, and cured pork. The stable smells of hay, leather, sweat, and manure, all held down by the coming rain. A carriage shed creaks as the wind nudges it. Chickens mutter and fuss in their coop. dogs circle, restless and alert, then settle under cover where they can keep one eye on the yard. Plantation records from the period often listed buildings and supplies in Carr's tidy terms, as though a place could be summed up by inventories. But the lived reality was noise, odour, damp cloth, aching backs, hot kitchens, buzzing insects, and the endless demand to be ready for morning. You walk farther along the packed path, and the ground has already begun to change beneath your shoes. What was dry and firm at sunset now gives slightly at the edges. The red Alabama clay is famous for many things, and modesty is not one of them. It clings, it stains, it waits all year for a chance to grab your ankles with dramatic flair. The first true rain arrives in scattered drops, large and warm, each one darkening the dust in quick little circles. They strike leaves overhead with hollow taps. They patter on the roof of a shed. They land on your hands with a touch as soft as breath. By this hour, much of the day's field labour would have ended, at least officially. On large Alabama plantations in 1840, enslaved people worked in gangs under supervision, especially in cotton cultivation, from planting to chopping to picking, depending on the season. But ended is a slippery word in such a place. There were always tools to gather, animals to check, children to mind, food to prepare, clothes to mend, and tasks assigned without regard for weather or weariness. Rain might interrupt some outdoor labour, but it did not dissolve the system. It merely changed the sounds. You hear voices now from the direction of the quarters, low voices, close together. A child crying, then quickly soothed, a laugh that rises and falls fast. The quarters sit apart from the main house, placed for labour and oversight rather than comfort. On some plantations they were built in rows, on others they formed irregular clusters. Here they stand as a small settlement of cabins with stick chimneys and plank walls, set where the ground is slightly uneven and where drainage is not as generous as one might hope, which is a charming way of saying that a good rain could make the paths miserable. Light glows through a few cracks in the boards. Smoke trails from chimneys and is pulled sideways by the wind. The smell here is different from the main yard. You notice damp earth, wet ash, boiled corn, old wood, wool cloth slowly drying, and the human closeness of crowded shelter. This is where the emotional centre of the night truly lies, though official letters and newspaper pieces of the time rarely admitted as much. Enslaved communities created family, memory, music, belief, skill, and endurance under conditions designed to crush all of those things. You feel that tension in the air more strongly than the storm. Rain begins in earnest. Not a violent burst yet, but a steady sheet slanting through the yard. The roofs answer in different voices. A shingled roof gives a sharp, quick rattle. A rougher cabin roof offers a softer, more uneven drumming. Water runs off porch edges in silvery threads. It darkens the trunks of trees and slicks the fence rails until they shine. The world loses some of its edges. Distance becomes a blur. Sound travels strangely in weather like this. Clear in one direction, muffled in another. You pause beneath the edge of a structure, perhaps a shed or lean-to, and listen. Thunder again. Closer now. Then the simple domestic sounds that keep going underneath it. A ladle against a pot. A baby's hiccup in breath. Someone sweeping a floor even though it will be muddy again in minutes. Cloth wrung out by hand. A door pulled shut. A horse stamping in the stable. The storm does not erase ordinary effort. It accompanies it. Inside the main house, supper is likely arranged with ceremony even on a damp evening. Wealthier plantation households often dined by candlelight from imported ceramics or silver if they had them, presenting themselves as polished southern gentry. Yet historians still debate how complete that image really was outside memoir and self-flattering records. Some houses were grand by regional standards, but awkwardly furnished, half-finished, or perpetually strained by debt. Cotton could make fortunes. Yes, but it also built lives on credit, speculation, and appearances. Even in the rain, status had to keep up its little theatre. The theatre thins at the edges, though candle smoke curls, wax softens in the heat, damp air presses against window panes, shoes leave tracks on polished floors, children grow sleepy and fretful, mosquitoes find their way in. Somewhere a servant carries a basin of water gone lukewarm. Somewhere else a woman folds linen while listening for the storm. Comfort in 1840 was always partial, even luxury sweated. At the quarters, comfort is even more fragile, but no less real when people manage to make it. A small fire can turn a cabin into a pocket of amber light. A pot of food, however plain, can scent the room with welcome. Cornbread, peas, greens, salt pork when available, maybe a little molasses, maybe not. Diets varied, and enslaved families often supplemented rations through gardens, fishing, trapping, or cooking what could be gathered. Some plantations allowed patches of ground for personal use, though under the constant rule of the owner. In the rainy dusk, the smell of food coming from a cabin window has a warmth that reaches you before any flame does. You imagine a hand smoothing a child's hair, a wet shirt hung near the hearth, shoes left by the door, tin cups lined along a shelf, palmetto fans, baskets, patched quilts, maybe a carved spoon, maybe a Bible if one had been obtained, maybe not. Historians disagree on how often certain personal possessions appeared from cabin to cabin, because the surviving evidence is uneven and often filtered through hostile or careless observers. But what survives clearly is ingenuity. People made worlds from little. Another flash comes, brighter this time, lighting the yard in a flat white instant. Every object sharpens, tree branches gleam, puddles flare. The side of the main house looks almost blue. Then darkness folds back in, deeper for a second than before. A child somewhere gasps, then laughs once the thunder follows. Adults murmur. The rain keeps up its patient conversation with every roof and leaf. The plantation at night also carries rules you cannot quite see but can feel. Who may move where, who must answer to whom, which doors open freely, and which only under orders. The storm wraps the land in softness, yet the power inside it remains hard. Alabama law in this period supported slavery in severe terms, treating enslaved people as property while also fearing their movement, gatherings, literacy, and autonomy. Patrols, passes, punishments, and surveillance formed part of the wider landscape beyond any single plantation. Even a cozy rain, with all its sleepy charm, falls on a world built from coercion. And still, humans remain stubbornly human. In one cabin, someone hums while stirring a pot. In another, an older voice tells a story while children lean closer to the fire. A man oils a tool handle because tomorrow will come regardless of clouds. A woman shakes rain from a cloth and laughs at the way the wind has bullied the laundry line. Someone steps into the doorway just to smell the storm. That small pause contains a kind of freedom no ledger can measure. The rain cools the night at last. You feel it in the air on your face and wrists. The heat of the day loosens its grip. Pine scent grows stronger. Wet clay releases its iron smell. A breeze enters the yard and touches the skin like a damp handkerchief. Farther out in the fields, the cotton leaves tremble and whisper together. The rows look darker now, almost swallowed by the weather, stretching into blackness under a sky that flickers now and then with pale internal light. You stand and let the scene settle around you. Lamps glow in the house. Firelight breathes in the cabins. Smoke drifts low. Rain speaks on wood, earth, and leaf. Frogs call from the ditches, bold little night musicians. A sleepy chicken object once from its roost, then thinks better of it. The mule, still unconvinced by the weather, snorts again from under shelter. Reasonable fellow. Nothing here is simple. though it might sound peaceful from a distance. The evening holds beauty and strain in the same hand. The storm makes the plantation quieter, but not kinder. It softens the air while exposing every need for shelter, warmth, food, and rest. You feel the weight of the place, and also its intimate details. The grain of wet wood under your fingertips, the smell of chimney smoke in the rain, the hush that follows each roll of thunder. Night is settling fully now, and the plantation draws inward. Doors close, fires are tended, candles steady themselves against the draught. The sky lowers, the fields disappear, and the whole world seems to shrink to circles of light floating in the warm dark, while rain drums on and on, gentle, persistent, almost tender. If you didn't know how much can hide beneath a gentle sound, the rain thickens as you turn your attention toward the big house, where light pools across the porch floor in soft yellow bands and then fades into wet darkness. The building rises above the yard with practiced confidence, as if timber and brick themselves have learned posture from their owners. Even in a storm, it means to be admired. White columns catch brief flashes of lightning. Window glass glows like honey. The front steps shine under the rain, each one slick and dark at the edge, pale where lamplight reaches. You approach along a walkway that has been tamped flat by many feet, though not all feet have crossed it with equal welcome. The boards of the porch give a little under your weight. They smell of damp wood, old paint, and the faint sourness of humidity trapped inside the grain. Somewhere under the eaves, water drips in a steady rhythm into a barrel. Tap, pause, tap. It sounds almost careful. You could call it soothing if you were in a generous mood. The storm, at least, is doing its part for the atmosphere. The house itself follows a pattern seen across the cotton South in these decades. A central hall helps move air through the rooms. High ceilings try to coax heat upward. Large windows welcome breezes when the weather behaves, which in Alabama is a bold thing to expect from nature. On prosperous plantations, the home of the owner served not only as shelter but as an argument. It argued that wealth was stable, taste was refined, and the family inside stood at the centre of a well-ordered world. The furniture, the silver, the draperies, the arrangement of portraits on the wall, all of it joined the speech. Inside, the entry hall carries the cool scent of plaster, beeswax, wet wool, and candle smoke. A runner stretches along the floorboards, its colours muted by dim light. Pegs along the wall hold hats and cloaks. An umbrella stand near the door catches a few dripping items, though the umbrella itself remained something of a luxury object in 1840, more likely to belong to a wealthy household than to anyone labouring in the fields. Water beads on the threshold. A servant bends to wipe it away before it can spread. Little signs of weather must be managed quickly here. Mud has no manners, and the house prides itself on having some. The front parlour waits to the right, arranged for conversation, visiting, and display. You enter a room where chairs sit at deliberate angles, each one ready to suggest leisure, without ever fully relaxing into it. A sofa with carved wooden arms faces the fireplace. Side tables hold lamps, porcelain figures, and a few books whose placement seems almost too perfect to be accidental. The hearth is not lit for heat tonight, but embers may have been coaxed for dryness, just enough to cut the damp. The room smells faintly of rosewater, polished mahogany, and old upholstery warmed by long summer air. A square piano stands against the wall, its dark surface reflecting candle flames in broken little streaks. Music was a prized marker of gentility in many planter households, especially for daughters expected to demonstrate culture as neatly as they did embroidery or posture. You can almost imagine a hand lifting the fallboard, then hesitating because the storm has made the room feel softer, heavier, less inclined toward cheerful tunes. Rain often quiets a house in ways even family members do not quite notice. Voices drop, steps slow, teacups rest longer in the hand, Portraits look down from the walls with that familiar painted expression of people trying not to blink for history. One stern gentleman in a dark coat appears to disapprove of the moisture in general. A woman in lace seems calmer, though perhaps that is just the painter being kind. Family images in such homes were less about private memory than public claim. They announced continuity. They said, in effect, "We belong here." This was a complicated thing to declare in a region still transforming itself through land seizure, forced migration, slave labour, and speculative wealth. The portraits remain serene anyway. Oil paint can be marvellously selective. In the dining room, supper is underway or nearly finished. The long table is dressed in linen, silver, and ceramic plates that may have come from England or the American Northeast. Food arrives in courses or near courses, depending on the household's means and patience. You catch the smell of roasted chicken, ham, stewed beans, buttered squash, hot biscuits, and black pepper. There may be preserves, there may be pickles, there may be syllabub, custard, or pie if the kitchen has managed it. Plantation households with money often tried to imitate elite dining styles, though practice varied wildly. Some tables were orderly and formal, others were elegant only until the children started reaching. Candles tremble each time wind presses against the shutters. Their light turns silverware into warm sparks. Forks touch plates with a small, polite clink. A chair scrapes back. Someone requests more gravy. Someone else comments on the rain in tones that suggest inconvenience rather than dependence, as though weather were chiefly notable for spoiling a drive or dampening silk. Yet the plantation economy lived by weather. Cotton needed careful timing, and heavy rain could affect roads, work schedules, storage, and transport. The people at this table may discuss clouds as a nuisance, but the clouds are woven into every bite. You notice the labour hidden beneath the meal. A serving dish appears before anyone asks how it travelled from kitchen to table through darkness and mud. A linen napkin is replaced once stained. A child spills water, and the accident vanishes into the work of another pair of hands. In many big houses, enslaved women and men cooked, served, cleaned, carried fuel, drew water, washed clothes, minded children, and tended to the endless small crises of domestic life. The visible calm of the dining room depended on invisible motion at its edges. That motion never quite stops. The kitchen, whether attached, semi-detached, or standing as a separate building, is warmer, louder, and more truthful. You step closer and feel the heat before you fully enter. Fire glows under iron pots. Steam rises. The room smells of ash, salt pork, wet aprons, boiled greens, yeast, onion skins, and wood smoke trapped low by the rain. A cook lifts a lid, and a fragrant cloud escapes. Another worker wipes a table with swift, tired strokes. Someone kneads dough with strong wrists. Someone else leans briefly against the wall to rest a back that has been upright since dawn. The sounds here are practical. Spoon against pot, knife on board, rain on roof, breath. Southern plantation kitchens were often placed slightly apart from the main house to reduce fire risk and heat, though arrangements differed. This separation also created a physical reminder that comfort in one building came from strain in another. You feel that plainly here. The main table may admire the biscuits. The kitchen knows what it took to make them in damp weather with limited time, constant oversight, and a fire that sulks whenever wind drives down the chimney. Historians still argue about how much authority skilled enslaved cooks could exercise within these spaces. Some clearly influenced menus and daily routine, yet skill did not equal freedom. Talent merely made exploitation more profitable. Upstairs, the private rooms hold another version of plantation life. Bedrooms are less public than parlours, but no less revealing. You climb a staircase polished smooth at the centre from years of use. The hall above smells of linen, lavender sachets, lamp oil, and moist night air slipping through cracks around the shutters. Bedrooms contain bedsteads with ropes or slats. feather mattresses for the fortunate, washstands with pitchers and basins, straight-backed chairs, trunks, perhaps a small writing desk. Mosquito netting may be present in summer, hanging like pale ghost cloth around the bed. It flutters slightly in the moving air. The mistress of the house might retire here after supper with sewing, correspondence, or a devotional book. Her room may contain a work basket, folded shawls, and a porcelain dish holding hairpins. Planter women often managed extensive domestic systems, including food stores, textiles, poultry yards, medicine cupboards, and the supervision of enslaved house servants, all while being expected to appear composed and feminine. Their letters often mention illness, loneliness, weather, childbirth, social calls, and worries over money. The image of effortless plantation Grace was just that, an image. Grace took management, and management was exhausting. In another room, children are being prepared for bed, nightshirts rustle, a comb pulls through damp hair. One child asks if the thunder can strike the chimney. Another insists on a second story. The nursery smells of soap, warm milk, wet shoes left too near the door, and the faint powdery scent of old quilts. A candle burns low on the mantel. The shadows it casts turn chair backs into tall, watchful creatures, which is very unfair to children already asked to sleep through a storm. Every generation has discovered that bedtime becomes dramatically more complicated once thunder joins the conversation. The master of the plantation may keep an office or study on the ground floor, perhaps lined with account books, letters, newspapers, ledgers, and maps. Here the romance of the southern estate drops its lace handkerchief and reveals arithmetic, cotton shipments, land notes, slave purchases, debts to factors, seed costs, tools, taxes, interest. All of it lives in columns of ink. The room smells of paper, leather, sealing wax, and stale tobacco. Rain ticks against the pane while numbers wait under candlelight. A plantation was a household. Yes, but it was also a business operated through force. The study knows this more plainly than the parlour does. On one shelf there may be agricultural journals or manuals advising on crop rotation, livestock, drainage, or the latest cotton processing methods. Planters often saw themselves as practical men of improvement, students of efficiency and order. They wrote letters about soil and markets with a seriousness that might almost impress you if the foundation of their system were not so brutally obvious. One quirky detail from the period is that some owners became deeply interested in experimental fertilizers, imported grasses, or fancy fruit trees while neglecting the crumbling cabins of the people whose labour sustained everything. Human priorities can be arranged in surprisingly elegant nonsense. Near the back of the house, service spaces create a second circulation system. Narrow passages, side doors, pantry rooms, stairways less polished than the main one, all allow goods and workers to move with minimal disruption to family display. A tray passes through a door. A bucket of water comes up from the yard. Soiled plates disappear. Fresh candles arrive. Bedding is aired when weather permits. Chamber pots are handled discreetly, because polite society always prefers to imagine that bodily realities solve themselves. They do not, of course. Someone carries them. The storm outside grows steadier rather than wilder. Rain now falls in full sustained sheets, washing the yard into a dark reflective plain. Lightning flares now and then, but farther off. The house settles into nighttime sounds. A shutter knocks once, then is secured. Floorboards creak overhead. A baby starts crying in some distant room and then quiets. From the kitchen, a last burst of scraping and rinsing fades. Water runs from the roof in thicker streams. The whole structure seems to breathe with the weather, inhaling damp and exhaling warmth. For all its claims to solidity, the big house remains vulnerable. Roofs leak, cellars mildew, fabrics mould, rats find grain. Illness moves through families with little respect for status. Yellow fever, malaria, dysentery, and countless fevers shaped southern life in ways architecture could not fully answer. Mosquitoes drift through screens or around them. Summer heat spoils food. Winter snaps freeze pipes and fingers alike. The grand home promises security. Yet nature and disease keep revising the contract. Wealth could cushion discomfort, but it could not banish uncertainty. And then there is the moral instability, harder to name in the room itself but impossible to ignore. The lamps glow softly, the table shines. Rain sings on the roof with almost hypnotic tenderness. Yet every polished surface rests on a system of theft from human lives, from labour, from kinship, from freedom itself. The house is beautiful in pieces. The whole arrangement is not. That tension hangs in the air as surely as humidity. Still, night has its own quieting power. The family withdraws room by room. Candles are pinched out, hallways dim. The scent of cooling food lingers near the dining room door. Upstairs, bedsteads receive tired bodies. Below, the last kitchen embers sink into red. Rain keeps brushing the house from eave to sill, from porch rail to shutter hinge, smoothing the sounds until they blend into one soft, continuous hush. You stand in that hush for a moment longer and feel how the big house glows against the storm, stately and sheltered, while every light inside depends on work that has not yet fully gone to sleep. You leave the wide porch and its polished claims behind, stepping into the wetter dark where the plantation breathes more honestly. The path narrows almost at once. Rainwater has already gathered in shallow hollows, turning the packed earth slick beneath your shoes. Each step gives a small wet sound, a soft pull and release, as if the Alabama clay would like a word with you personally. It clings with devotion. It also stains without apology. Tonight it has found ideal working conditions. Ahead, the cabins emerge through the rain in broken lines of light and shadow. They're smaller than the big house by a cruel measure, lower to the ground, simpler in every visible way, and far more crowded with life. Some stand close together, some a little apart, depending on how the place was arranged by the owner or altered over time by need. Their walls are made from rough boards, their chimneys from brick or sticks daubed with clay, their roofs patched and repatched where weather and use have worn them thin. The storm gives every surface a dark sheen. Smoke from damp wood hangs low, unable to rise cleanly in the wet air. The quarters form the true village of the plantation, though no map made by an owner would admit that with much feeling. This is where enslaved families and kin networks tried to build a life under impossible terms. Children grew here, elders held memory here, songs, recipes, warnings, jokes, prayers, quarrels, remedies, and hopes moved from person to person in these cabins and doorways. Even in the rain, you feel the dense human texture of the place long before you reach the first threshold. A dog shakes itself beneath a cabin step and then looks at you with the weary dignity of a creature that has accepted bad weather as a permanent feature of the universe. Nearby, a chicken has wedged itself under a barrel stand and appears deeply offended by all natural forces. A pig snuffles near a fence, then retreats from a puddle with sudden drama. The rain taps on every board, leaf, and bucket. It streams from roof edges in silver lines. It gathers in ruts and runs toward a ditch that is already losing its argument with the water. You pause near the first cabin and listen. The sound from inside is low and layered. Fire crackles. Someone coughs. A spoon touches the rim of an iron pot. Cloth rustles. A child whispers something and is hushed, not sharply, just gently. Through a narrow gap between the planks, lamplight or firelight slips out in warm thin stripes. The smell is immediate and intimate. Wet wood, smoke, cornmeal, human skin dried slowly after labour. wool and cotton cloth steaming near the hearth, the sweetness of onions softening in fat. It is not a luxurious smell. It is a lived smell. It tells you at once that effort continues even after darkness settles. You step closer to a doorway where the curtain or door has not been fully shut against the weather. Inside, the room is small, one main space with perhaps a loft, partition, or attached lean area depending on the cabin and the people who have had to adapt it. Firelight throws copper tones across the walls. The floorboards are uneven. A few stools stand near the hearth. Pegs hold garments drying by the heat. A bed frame, or more than one, takes up part of the room, fitted with ticking, quilts, blankets, or whatever bedding has been managed. A pallet lies near one wall for children or extra sleepers. Storage is tucked wherever it can be. A shelf with a few cups, a basket, a gourd dipper, a pot hook, a cracked plate saved because a cracked plate still holds food. The cabin feels crowded, but crowding itself changes meaning depending on who shares it. In some places, several people sleep in one room because there is no choice. In others, closeness becomes defense against isolation. On many plantations, enslaved cabins were built too poorly, too narrowly, and too few for the number of people expected to live in them. Travellers sometimes describe the quarters with shock, though not always with useful honesty. Owners often minimise the conditions in account books and public speech. The rain, however, is an excellent inspector. It finds every weakness in a roof and every gap in a wall with patient precision. A leak has formed near the corner of this cabin. Someone has placed a bowl beneath it, and the drops fall with a neat, bright plink. Practical, resigned, efficient. No speech is wasted on the matter. Another pair of hands shifts, bedding a little farther from the damp. The movement is automatic, clearly repeated on other nights. Shelter here is not a fixed condition. It must be negotiated each time the weather turns. Supper is underway in several cabins at once, and the smells mingle in the rainy air. Boiled cornmeal mush, field peas, greens cut from a small patch or foraged from somewhere along the edges of the property, salt pork where rations have stretched that far, molasses, perhaps, if a little has been saved, sweet potatoes roasting in embers. Some plantations allotted weekly food rations such as cornmeal and pork, but the amounts were often inadequate, which pushed enslaved people to supplement what they were given through gardens, fishing, hunting, trapping, or trading when possible. The whole settlement smells of ingenuity under pressure. In one doorway, an older woman sits with a pan in her lap, shelling peas by touch more than sight. Her fingers move steadily while rain hisses beyond the porch edge. A child leans against her knee, drowsy and sticky with humidity. She tells a story in a low musical voice, not performed for show, just offered into the room as naturally as heat from the fire. Her words rise and fall with a rhythm shaped by memory, labour, and the need to hold attention without wasting energy. A younger woman stirs the pot while listening. A man near the wall repairs a strap or handle, drawing a blade along leather with careful short motions. No one here is idle, yet the mood is not frantic. It is concentrated. Work and rest are braided together because they have to be. The rain intensifies and drumming fills the brief silences. Roofs answer differently depending on what covers them. Shingles produce a quicker chatter. Patchwork sections thud more heavily. Places where the boards sit loose add a faint rattle, like teeth trying not to chatter. Thunder follows with a long belly deep roll that makes the cups on the shelf tremble. A baby startles, then settles when lifted and held against a warm shoulder. Touch matters here. You feel it everywhere. A hand at a child's back, a quilt tucked over tired legs, a wet shirt wrung out, bare feet extended toward the hearth to dry. You move along the lane between cabins, and the ground grows softer. The rain has churned wood ash, dirt, bits of straw, and chicken scratch into a slick, dark paste. Smoke drifts into your face and catches in your throat with a bitter edge. Farther along, another cabin glows brighter than the rest. Inside, a few voices are singing very softly, not performance singing, not anything grand, just a tune carried under the breath, enough to steady the body after the field and soften the room for children. Music in enslaved communities carried many roles at once, from worship to work rhythm to coded meaning to simple comfort. Scholars still disagree on how often specific African musical patterns persisted distinctly within various regions, because evidence is fragmentary and often filtered through outsiders who heard without fully understanding. But no one who listens closely can doubt the power of song in a place like this. At another hearth, an elder tends a small pot of herbs steeping in hot water. The scent is sharp and green, a little minty, a little bitter. Home remedies formed an important part of daily survival in the quarters. Plant knowledge moved across generations, shaped by African traditions, indigenous knowledge, local experimentation, and harsh necessity. Sassafras, horehound, willow, camphor, pennyroyal, boneset, and many other plants might be used for fevers, coughs, stomach troubles, aches, or simple comfort. Not every remedy worked. Of course, some helped. Some merely gave the sick person a warm drink and the comfort of being cared for, which is not nothing at all. You catch a quieter sound from one cabin, the scratch of a needle pulled through cloth. Inside, a woman patches a shirt by firelight, her eyes narrowed in concentration. The shirt is already mended in several places. Cloth was valuable, and garments were expected to last well beyond dignity. Plantation records sometimes listed yearly issue of clothing as if the matter were straightforward. One shirt, one pair of trousers, one blanket. Simple, on paper, on bodies. It was another story. Wet seasons, heavy labour, washing, growth, pregnancy, and repeated repairs all made a mockery of neat inventory lines. The patched shirt in her hand tells the truth more clearly than any ledger. Children drift through the quarters with the loose gravity of evening. Some are still lively despite the hour, hopping around puddles, chasing one another, or standing in doorways to watch lightning flare. Others are already wilting, their eyelids heavy, their hair damp at the temples, their limbs warm from the fire. Childhood here is threaded with chores and watchfulness, yet it still makes room for play when it can. A little boy pokes at a stream of rain coming off a roof and jerks his hand back, delighted by the cold. His sister laughs at him with great authority, then does the exact same thing. The cabins also hold the sharper edges of plantation life. Crowding can breed friction. Hunger shortens tempers. Fatigue makes every small irritation louder. A crying baby at midnight is not poetic when two adults have aching backs, and dawn will bring labour again. A leak in the wrong place can ruin bedding. A quarrel over food, over a borrowed pan, over whose turn it is to fetch water, can spark quickly in such conditions. Yet the remarkable thing is not that conflict exists. The remarkable thing is how much tenderness survives beside it. A man returns from the rain carrying armfuls of wood tucked under his chin. The logs are damp, and he sets them near the hearth with a grunt. A girl hands him a cloth without being asked. Another cabin sends over a bit of extra ash for the fire. One woman checks on a neighbour with a fever. Someone shares onion, someone salt, someone news. Assistance moves quietly, not because it is rare, but because it is necessary enough to feel ordinary. Community here is built from repeated small acts that official documents almost never considered worth writing down. There is a strange sort of beauty in the windows, if you can call them that. Some cabins have actual panes. Some have shutters or openings covered as best they can. Through each gap, light escapes into the rain in a different shape. One square and bright, one thin and flickering, one nearly lost behind smoke. The whole row becomes a loose constellation of human presence, lantern by lantern, fire by fire, out beyond them, the fields disappear into darkness. In here, each cabin insists on being a tiny centre of the world. A fringe detail from plantation archaeology is how much can be learned from the smallest discarded objects. Beads, clay pipe fragments, buttons, marbles, cowrie shells, pottery shards, bits of blue glass placed under a doorstep or near an entry. Historians and archaeologists debate the meaning of some of these finds, especially where spiritual practice, decoration, and practical reuse overlap. Was an object simply handy, or protective, or both? The uncertainty itself feels appropriate. Lives under slavery had to conceal as much as they expressed. Not every belief could announce itself openly. Sometimes the hidden thing mattered most. The weather gradually cools the cabins, though not evenly. Close to the fire your skin warms and dries. Near the wall the damp creeps through cloth and settles into your shoulders. The smell of rain changes as the night deepens. Early rain smells like dust surrendering. Late rain smells darker, more rooted, full of soaked pine bark, chimney soot, wet clay, and the rank sweetness of the yard. Frogs sing loudly from the ditch. Insects hush for a while, then begin again in thinner notes. Somewhere, a mule complains with theatrical misery from a nearby shelter. The creature clearly believes the weather has singled it out for injustice. A gust of wind presses rain under one door and sends everyone nearest the entrance shifting their feet. Someone stuffs a rag along the threshold. Someone else laughs softly at the whole business. The laugh matters. Humour appears in hard places because hard places need relief more than anyone. Plantation narratives recorded by formerly enslaved people generations later often preserve flashes of wit alongside grief and endurance. Sarcasm, teasing, mimicry, jokes about weather, owners, animals, and daily trouble all lived here too. A human being will make a joke beside a leaking roof if only to prove that the roof has not won. As the hour grows later, movement slows, bowls empty, firelight steadies. The smallest children are laid down with a final adjustment of blanket or hand-sewn pillow. Wet garments hang where they can catch warmth by morning. Adults sit a little longer near the hearth because the simple act of sitting, after a day directed by others, has its own quiet sweetness. A voice murmurs a prayer. Another voice answers. Thunder has moved farther off now, leaving the rain to carry the night on its own. You stand in the lane once more and take in the quarters as a whole. Smoke lingers under the trees, mud glistens in the scattered light, cabin walls darken and shine where the water finds them. Inside each small shelter, people arrange sleep, food, care, memory, and patience as best they can. The plantation may measure them by labour, by price, by control. The cabins refuse that measure. They hold grief, certainly, and danger and deprivation. They also hold artistry, kinship, adaptation, discipline, and the stubborn daily work of remaining fully human in a system built to deny it. The rain keeps falling with a soft, relentless tenderness over every roof in the quarters. It does not choose favourites. It taps on the patched cabins and the stable shed, on the barrel hoops and fence rails, on the kitchen garden leaves and the washpots left outside. In the warm, damp dark, these modest shelters glow like embers set in mud, fragile and real, while the people inside them shape one more night of life from whatever the world has left in their hands. The storm does not end the work. It changes its tempo. That is all. You discover this the moment you leave the cabins and follow the dim movement of bodies through the rain. Each person still attached to some unfinished duty. Night has settled fully now, yet the plantation remains active in a quieter, harder way. The broad tasks of daylight have narrowed into the smaller tasks that somehow feel endless. A field can wait for morning if the weather insists. A hungry animal will not. A wet tool left uncared for will rust. A lamp gone dark must be trimmed and relit. Supper pots must be scrubbed. Water must still be carried. Children must be washed, soothed, and laid down. Labour after sundown is less visible, which perhaps is why polite memory so often pretends it barely existed. You move first toward the stable yard, where lantern light wavers in the wet air, and the smell reaches you before the structure does. Hay, soaked leather, manure, wet hide, and trampled straw mix into one heavy animal warmth. A horse stamps inside, irritated by thunder that now growls only at a distance. Another tosses its head and rattles the halter ring. The stable roof answers the rain with a drumming so dense it almost seems to press the dark downward. A man with a lantern checks the stalls one by one, lifting hooves from the mud, feeling the latches, running a hand along a flank to quiet a nervous animal. His shirt clings to his back. His cuffs are wet. He moves with the tired focus of someone who cannot afford mistakes. Plantations depended on animal labour as much as human labour in many daily routines. Horses, mules, oxen, cows, pigs, and chickens all required feeding, shelter, and attention in weather like this. You watch another figure lug a bucket toward the trough, boots sinking at each step. Water splashes his calves. He does not pause to complain because the rain has no interest in hearing it. One mule pushes its nose against his sleeve anyway, hopeful for feed or simple company. Mules are often described as stubborn, which feels slightly unfair when one considers the humans who gave them most of their assignments. In this yard, the animal seems merely practical. The feed room is close and sour with grain dust and damp sacks. Cornmeal has to be kept from spoiling. Harness must be hung where it can dry. A saddlecloth is laid near a warmer spot. A whip handle is wiped down. A broken buckle is examined in lantern glow and set aside for repair. Nothing dramatic occurs, yet everything matters. Survival on a plantation depended on constant maintenance, and most of that maintenance fell on enslaved hands. The labour system did not end when the field rows vanished into darkness. It simply withdrew into corners, sheds, kitchens, and back rooms where fewer eyes bothered to notice. You cross the yard toward the work area near the gin house and storage sheds. The cotton gin itself, where one exists on the property, is a reminder that the plantation is not just a farm, but a machine. In the 1840 cotton economy, separating fibres from seed efficiently transformed profit on a large scale, and every planter who could afford equipment understood the importance of processing and storage. Tonight the machinery is quiet, which feels almost unnatural. Rain rattles on the roof, water runs along the packed earth in thin streams. Inside, the wooden structure smells of lint, oil, dust turned damp, and old labour. A few tools hang along the wall. A cartwheel leans nearby. Someone has come to cover stacked items with canvas before the wind drives in harder from the side. Even in the storm, there is wood to split or at least sort, because wet nights consume fuel greedily. Near a shed, two figures work under partial cover, taking already cut pieces and moving them away from direct rain. The sound of wood on wood cuts neatly through the weather. Thock, slide, thock, hands grip, lift, stack, repeat. Splinters catch in skin. Wet bark leaves dark streaks on the wrists. A small pile becomes a larger pile. The larger pile becomes tomorrow's warmth, tomorrow's cooking fire, tomorrow's chance at dry socks if fortune is feeling unusually generous. Firewood is humble, but humble things often decide whether a night is tolerable. In another corner of the plantation, laundry still hangs under shelter, half dry and half hopeless. A woman gathers what she can before wind pushes the damp too deep into the cloth. She snaps out a shirt, folds it over one arm, then reaches for another. The scent of wet linen rises cool and faintly soapy. Domestic labour in this world is a long parade of fabrics. Sheets, shirts, towels, aprons, stockings, baby cloths, table linens, work garments, all of them used hard, dirtied quickly, and expected to return clean through labour that left few records behind. Historians still argue over the exact daily rhythm of washing and mending on plantations, because surviving descriptions differ widely by seasonally, size, and wealth. The uncertainty changes nothing about the work's sheer repetition. Near the detached kitchen, the tasks are entering their second life. Supper may be served, but now comes the scraping of pots, the saving of drippings, the covering of leftovers, the rinsing of bowls, the sweeping of ashes, the banked fire arranged so morning can begin without heroic effort. You stand in the doorway and feel heat rush at your face. The kitchen is close as an oven, humid from steam and crowded with scents that cling to the throat. Onion peel, grease, scorched cornmeal, lye soap, ash, damp pine, and the tang of iron pots cooling by degrees. A woman bends over a basin, scrubbing with quick circular motions that have long since passed from conscious thought into the body itself. Her shoulders rise and fall. A younger helper wipes the table and wrings the rag. Water drips from her elbows to the floor. A child nearby has been asked to shell peas or sort beans and is doing the task with noble reluctance. Tiny fingers move slower than patience would prefer. The child yawns, resumes, then loses count and starts over. You cannot help admiring this early introduction to the universal human tradition of pretending not to notice work that is absolutely still waiting. Yet even this small labour matters. In the plantation world, children often entered work early, first through minor chores and later through more demanding tasks. The line between helping and being absorbed into the labour system came far sooner than it should have. The rain outside grows gentler for a few minutes, not enough to stop, just enough to let other sounds rise. You hear a hammer from somewhere behind the smokehouse. Curious, you follow it to a small lean shelter where a man is repairing a broken handle by lantern light. Each strike is careful and spaced. He's not building anything grand. He's rescuing a tool from uselessness because tools cost money and delay costs punishment. The wood handle smells fresh where it has been cut and shaped. Shavings curl at his feet, already darkening in the damp. Tool repair is one of those half-invisible plantation tasks that reveals how much depended on skill rather than brute force alone. Hose, plough parts, hinges, buckets, yokes, handles, and wheels all needed mending by someone, usually with little time and less praise. A strange little detail from the period is how frequently plantation account books valued the tools themselves with more precise language than the hands required to wield them. One can find pages lovingly attentive to metal parts, seed varieties, wagon grease, rope, nails, and feed quantities. The people doing the lifting, stirring, and mending and carrying might be reduced to a first name or a number. It is a cruel sort of bookkeeping, cold enough to make the rain seem warm by comparison. Beyond the sheds, the yard drains badly into a lower patch where puddles have merged into a shallow brown mirror. A boy is sent to fetch something from across it and tries, with visible moral outrage, to keep his feet dry. This fails instantly. Mud closes over his ankles. He looks down as though betrayed by creation itself, then soldiers on with the solemn misery available only to the very young. When he returns, older voices laugh softly, not unkindly. Shared laughter here is often brief, but it lands with force. It is one of the few riches no ledger can seize. You notice, too, the labour of watching. On a plantation, someone is always watching for something. A candle left too near cloth, a hog nosing the wrong barrel, a child wandering towards standing water, a leak opening in the roof, a feverish forehead, a gate left loose, a white overseer or patrol rider appearing unexpectedly at night. Alertness itself becomes a form of work, and not a light one. The storm sharpens this vigilance. Rain hides footsteps, Wind masks voices. Darkness enlarges every uncertainty. At the edge of a garden plot, someone bends to inspect rows now glossed black in the wet. Small kitchen gardens could be precious on plantations, whether attached to the big house or cultivated by enslaved families in the little time left to them. Greens, beans, onions, sweet potatoes. And herbs were not merely pleasant additions. They could mean the difference between hunger and a fuller meal, between flavour and blandness, between illness and a useful remedy. Tonight the gardener presses a thumb into the soil, checking what the rain has done. Too little rain starves, too much drowns. The earth accepts no romantic speeches on the subject. In a side room of the main house, a house servant still moves quietly with a candlestick, preparing chambers for sleep. Curtains are drawn tighter, a pitcher is filled, a wash basin is set straight, damp shoes are placed nearer the hearth. One candle is pinched out, another replaced. Domestic labour in elite homes often depended on timing so exact it could look effortless. The bed appears ready, the room appears calm, the family retires, but calm has been staged, object by object, by hands expected to vanish from the picture. You catch only a glimpse of this movement before the servant passes out of sight again, swallowed by a back passage and the habits of invisibility. Closer to the quarters, labour takes on a more personal texture. A mother rinses a child's scraped knee with water from a tin cup. An older brother shakes out a wet blanket before hanging it near the fire. A young woman braids another's hair with steady, practised fingers while the rain ticks on the roof. Grooming, washing, tending, checking. All of it counts as work, though it rarely appears in formal descriptions. Human bodies needed care after labour, and the care itself required more labour. There is no neat stopping point. One task folds into another until the night finally wins by exhaustion. The storm resumes its stronger voice, and with it comes the smell of soaked pine bark and cooling brick. The air turns easier to breathe. Sweat no longer sits so stubbornly at the neck. A little breeze passes through the yard and lifts the edge of your sleeve. Somewhere a lantern flame gutters and is shielded by a cupped hand. Somewhere else a shutter bangs once and is cursed at under the breath with admirable sincerity. Even the most disciplined households make room for a mutter when a loose board decides to perform. You linger near the smokehouse where meat hangs in the dark interior, salted and cured against future want. The building smells powerful enough to season the rain itself. Salt, old wood, smoke, grease, and time. Food preservation was central to plantation management, and yet preserved food did not guarantee fair distribution. Rations for enslaved people could be meagre and inconsistent, even on prosperous estates. The sight of stored abundance beside daily scarcity tells you much about the moral architecture of the place. Hours slip by in these little duties. No bell marks them. No one writes poems about them. Yet they are the fibres that hold the night together. By now the large emotions have slowed. Most animals are fed. Most tools are under cover. Most kitchen work is complete. Most children have surrendered to sleep or near sleep. The plantation finally begins to soften at the edges, not because justice has arrived, but because bodies can do only so much before fatigue claims its rights. A final round of checks moves quietly across the property. A latch tested, a fire banked, a pot covered, a lantern lowered, a door pulled snug against the rain. The sounds shrink to essentials. Water falling from the eaves, insects returning in hesitant notes, frogs answering from the ditch, a distant cough, a low murmur from within a cabin. The storm has washed the heat from the ground and left behind that cool, damp hush unique to southern nights after rain, a hush that feels almost merciful on the skin. You stand still and take in the strange balance of the hour. Labour has not disappeared. It has merely retreated into the body, into the ache in the shoulders, the sting in the fingers, the heaviness behind the eyes. Work after sundown leaves few grand images. It offers only wet hems, rough hands, Smoky hair, quiet competence, and the small, stubborn triumph of getting through another evening with the essentials managed. Under the gentle rain, the plantation settles piece by piece. Each final task tucked into place by people who have given far more to the day than the day ever deserved. The hour turns softer once the hardest chores loosen their grip, and the plantation gathers itself around supper. Rain still falls, but now it sounds less like interruption, and more like a curtain drawn around the night. Under the cabin roofs, the weather makes the rooms feel close and sheltered, each fire-lit space holding its own small world of steam, shadow, and tired conversation. This is not leisure in any grand sense. It is the narrow breathing room wrestled from a long day, the precious stretch when hands can finally cradle a bowl instead of a tool. You step into a cabin where the meal is nearly ready, and warmth reaches you first. The hearth glows red and gold, its heat collecting low against your legs. An iron pot hangs from a hook over coals, giving off the gentle bubbling sound that means something plain but filling is almost done. The air smells of cornmeal, greens, onion, and a little pork fat melted into everything like a tiny act of mercy. Smoke clings to the rafters. Damp clothes hanging near the fire release a woolly, earthy scent as they dry. A loaf or pone rests near the edge of the hearth, crust deepening, its surface cracked from the heat. Bowls are handed out with quiet efficiency. No ceremony, just need and habit. A woman dips from the pot and fills each vessel to a careful level, making sure the portions stretch. You notice how exact the movement is. Not stingy, not careless, simply practiced. In households with too little, skill lies in making modest food feel sufficient. One child receives a warning look to wait for the hotter spoonful to cool. Another has already started blowing across the surface with intense seriousness, as if the fate of the Republic depends on soup temperature. That seems wise, honestly. A burned tongue at bedtime is no one's idea of comfort. The meal itself is simple, but simple food can carry remarkable dignity when it's shared. Cornbread is torn rather than sliced. Greens are eaten slowly, with appreciative little nods. Someone passes a small dish of salt as though passing silver. A bit of sorghum or molasses sweetens one corner of the meal if the family has managed to keep any. On many plantations, rations alone did not provide variety, so what appeared at supper often reflected private skill and stubborn resourcefulness. Garden patches, fishing lines, hidden herbs, hunted game, saved drippings. And careful barter could change an evening meal from mere fuel into something almost comforting. You notice one older man eating with measured slowness, not from weakness but from respect for the food. Between bites he speaks softly to the children about a plant that grows near the ditch after heavy rain, one that can be cooked if gathered young. His voice is steady and patient. Knowledge like this matters. It feeds more than curiosity, practical memory, especially about food and medicine, passed through cabins as surely as smoke passed through rafters. Scholars still debate how precisely certain African foodways endured in specific parts of the Deep South, because recipes were rarely written by the people who preserved them. Yet the methods, flavours, and habits of combining ingredients tell a long story even when the written record stammers. In another cabin, you find supper already underway and conversation moving more freely. Tiredness has loosened the day enough for teasing. A man claims he worked twice as hard as anyone within 20 feet of him. A woman snorts so loudly at this that the children giggle into their cups. Someone else points out that talking about labour while sitting down is suspiciously convenient. The room warms with laughter that comes in brief flashes, not constant, but bright enough to change the air. Humour survives here because it has work to do. It cuts tension. It restores some balance. It lets people name absurdity without inviting danger. The rain adds its own rhythm to these little exchanges. It patters on the roof, slides off the eaves, and taps into a bucket placed under a leak in the corner. The leak has a sound almost musical now, a tiny metronome beside the fire. Drop, pause, drop. No one bothers to complain. The bowl catches what it can, and the meal continues. Adaptation has become so ordinary that it barely needs words. Once bowls begin to empty, voices settle into a lower register. This is the hour when stories slip more easily into the room. Not performances for outsiders, not polished speeches, but living stories shaped to fit the listeners present. A grandmother begins with a memory from her youth, though she dresses it in humour so the sorrow sits farther back. She speaks of a journey taken years before, the dust, the heat, the strangeness of a new place, and the way one stubborn rooster seemed determined to rule an entire wagon yard. The children are delighted by the rooster and miss, for now, the grief behind the memory. The adults do not miss it. They nod without interrupting. Storytelling in enslaved communities carried many functions at once. It preserved personal history, offered warning, transmitted values, and gave children images larger than the narrow world around them. Trickster tales also held special power. In one cabin tonight, a clever rabbit appears in a whispered story, outwitting a stronger creature through nerve and wit. The children lean forward at once. A weak creature beating a powerful one through intelligence has obvious charm in any age, but here the appeal feels especially sharp. Folklorists have long traced links between such tales and West and Central African storytelling traditions, though the exact pathways remain contested in places. What is certain is the resilience of narrative itself. A good story can cross an ocean, survive a whip, and still make a child smile before sleep. A little later, song begins. It starts with one voice, low and unshowy, almost humming. Then another joins on a line that bends gently around the first. Soon the room carries a small woven sound, soft enough not to travel too far, strong enough to hold everyone inside it. The tune rocks rather than marches. It rises and falls like breathing. Some songs at night were sacred, some secular, some half one and half the other. Categories loved by scholars often mattered less in the living moment than comfort, memory, and shared feeling. The melody settles over the cabin like another blanket. You listen to the sound of hands moving while the singing continues. A spoon scrapes a bowl clean. A baby is shifted from one lap to another. Somebody folds a cloth with little snapping pats to smooth the corners. The hearth gives an occasional crack as sap in the wood gives way to heat. Outside, rain brushes leaves and darkens the yard. Inside, the singing smooths the hard edges of the room until the very shadows seem calmer. There is a fringe detail from plantation life that rarely appears in romantic paintings, though it tells you a great deal. People often kept small treasured items hidden among ordinary belongings, bits of cloth, carved pieces of wood, shells, coins, beads, or tiny objects with spiritual or personal meaning. During an evening like this, such an item may be touched without fanfare. A thumb over a bead, a hand resting briefly on a folded kerchief, a private reassurance. Archaeologists and historians disagree about the exact meanings of many such objects when they surface later, because lived significance does not always leave labels behind. Yet the presence of cherished things in poor material conditions reveals how deeply people defended an inner life. The children begin to droop at the edges of the gathering. One boy stares into the fire so long that his blinking grows slow and solemn, as though he is contemplating vast mysteries rather than losing a fight with sleep. A girl curls against an aunt's side, one foot still bare because she gave up halfway through the effort of putting herself in order. An older child tries to stay included in the conversation, and fails with graceful determination. The body always tells the truth at night. An adult woman near the hearth uses this quieter time to braid hair. Her fingers divide and smooth with steady gentleness, pulling just enough to hold, not enough to hurt. Hair care is both necessity and affection, maintenance and closeness at once. The scalp catches the light. The smell of warm oil rises faintly. In many enslaved communities, grooming helped preserve dignity under conditions built to strip it away. The work of washing, braiding, wrapping, and tending hair could also express continuity with inherited practices, though planters rarely notice such things unless they wish to control them. Power often overlooks whatever it cannot value. In another cabin, the evening takes a more devotional turn. A few neighbours have gathered close, and the song there carries a stronger spiritual tone. Nothing loud, nothing that would draw the wrong attention, just a murmur of belief shaped by long suffering and stubborn hope. Christianity among enslaved people in the South was layered and varied, blending imposed teachings with reinterpretation, selective emphasis, and older spiritual habits that survived in altered form. People heard different messages in the same Bible. Owners might point to obedience. The enslaved might hear deliverance. Rain on the roof accompanies both readings without taking sides. You notice how the weather seems to bless the hour by cooling the air enough for bodies to unclench. Faces shine less with sweat. Shoulders drop. The feverish heaviness of the day has drained off into the ground. Someone steps briefly into the doorway just to feel the rain-cooled breeze on the face, then returns inside with a satisfied sigh. The smell outdoors has deepened. Wet clay, bruised leaves, chimney soot, and distant pine all mingle in the dark. It is a rich scent, earthy and almost sweet, the sort of smell that makes a tired person close the eyes for just one extra second. Conversation drifts toward local bits of knowledge, small items of news. Who is unwell? Who may need help tomorrow? Whether the creek will rise by morning? Whether the patch of beans near the edge of the yard has had too much water? There is no sharp line between social time and planning time because survival makes them overlap. Community is partly affection and partly logistics. Both matter. One keeps the spirit upright, the other keeps the body fed. A young man produces a simple instrument, perhaps a fiddle if one has been obtained, perhaps something more improvised. The notes come softly at first, almost testing the room. Music in these spaces could be restrained or exuberant depending on the moment, the company, and the risks involved. Tonight it stays gentle. The bow or fingers move with sleepy patience. The tune winds between voices and the rain, not trying to overpower either. A child's head lifts for one bar, then sinks again against a shoulder. Even fatigue wants to hear a little more. Not every cabin is warm with easy fellowship. In one, silence dominates because sickness has entered. A feverish person lies near the fire while others keep the room orderly and dim. Supper is eaten more quietly there. Concern sits in every glance. A wet cloth is folded again and placed on a brow. A mug is lifted to unwilling lips. Nights like this reveal another truth of community. Song and laughter matter, but so do the stiller acts, the waiting, the wiping, the keeping watch when someone else cannot rest. Care is not always cheerful. Often it is merely faithful. You step back outside and see the quarters glowing through the rain, each cabin lit in its own degree, some bright with talk, some low and hushed. The lane between them is slick and dark. Water trickles around your shoes. Frogs call from the ditch with absurd confidence, as if they personally arrange this weather and expect gratitude. A gust of wind shakes droplets from the trees in a sudden silver spray. Somewhere nearby, a voice finishes a verse and another answers. The sound travels just enough to remind the whole row that no one is entirely alone. The night deepens, and the songs become fewer, softer, more intermittent. Stories taper into murmurs, bowls are stacked, embers are shifted. The final bits of bread are wrapped or saved. A child's sleepy protest rises and collapses into a yawn. One by one, the cabins move from supper toward rest. Yet the hour leaves behind a warmth stronger than the firelight itself. In these crowded shelters, amid patched roofs and damp thresholds, people have made room for nourishment that is not only food. They have shared memory, melody, warning, tenderness, and belief. The plantation can command labour. It cannot fully command what people give one another once the bowls are passed and the rain begins to sing above them. The rain settles into its deepest voice after supper. No longer a passing shower, but a full night's storm spreading itself across the plantation with calm determination. You step away from the cabins and look toward the fields, where the cotton rows have become long dark bands under a sky the colour of soot and wet slate. Lightning no longer cracks sharply overhead. Instead, it flickers far within the clouds, turning them pale for a second from the inside, as if the heavens are quietly thinking difficult thoughts. Between those flashes, the land disappears almost completely. Fence lines dissolve, furrows vanish, the world narrows to rain, mud, and the few warm windows still burning in the dark. You follow a path toward the edge of the cultivated ground, where the smell changes again. Near the cabins and yard you smelled smoke, supper, animals, and wet wood. Here you smell plants and soil. Cotton leaves, soaked through, give off a green, bitter scent when brushed. The red earth underneath has become slick and metallic, rich with that iron smell rain draws up from clay. Weeds near the ditch release a sharp, crushed fragrance under your step. Somewhere water is moving faster than before, gathering in the shallow channels cut to guide runoff away from the rows. Whether those channels succeed is, tonight, a question for optimists. The cotton itself looks strangely delicate in this weather. By day the plants are ordered into a pattern of labour, each row an instruction, each space between them a track for hose, hands, and tired feet. By night in the rain, they seem softer, almost vulnerable. Leaves droop under the water, small bowls sit hidden in the dark. The field breathes in a wet whisper when wind passes over it. Cotton made fortunes in Alabama by 1840, and plantation owners followed its progress with intense attention. Yet one strong storm could remind everyone that wealth rooted in a crop remained vulnerable to weather, blight, insects, and timing. Control in daylight has a way of looking less convincing after midnight rain. You pause at the edge of a drainage ditch and listen to the water. It slips and gurgles through reeds, carrying bits of leaf and loose soil with it. Frogs have taken this as an invitation to perform. Their calls rise from every wet place with comic confidence, as if each puddle has appointed itself a concert hall. Crickets answer from drier patches under brush. Somewhere a night bird gives a sudden lonely cry. The storm has not silenced the living world. It has rearranged the orchestra, farther off, beyond the main cotton ground. The animal pens are restless. You hear a pig give a sharp complaint, then another. Hogs never seem to agree with anything, including abundance. A cow lows from under shelter in a tone that suggests she has been personally wronged by cloud formation. Horses shift in the stable yard. Chickens, wedged miserably on their roosts, mutter in sleepy protest. Weather affects every creature on a plantation, and you can sense the whole system adjusting itself. Bodies lean toward cover. Hooves test mud. Feathers puff against the damp. Even the dogs move differently, trotting low and quick from porch to shed with their tails tucked against the rain. A gust comes over the field and lifts the cool, wet edge of your shirt. The heat of the day is finally gone. In its place there is that rare southern nighttime freshness that feels almost luxurious because it arrives only after enough weather has bullied the air into submission. The breeze smells of pine from the tree line and standing water from the lower ground. It touches your face like a damp cloth, not a warm bath sort of comfort, more the refreshing slap of reality. Still, after the earlier heaviness, it is a relief. You make your way toward a fence where rails gleam dark with water. Drops gather at the underside of each one, swell, then let go. The rhythm is mesmerizing. Rain has a patient intelligence about surfaces. It finds the nail heads, the knot holes, the rough split grain, the crooked joints. A plantation in fair weather presents itself in outlines and boundaries. Under steady rain, those boundaries blur. The road becomes a stream. The yard becomes a mirror. The ditch becomes a ribbon of movement. The field and the sky nearly become one thing. It is a gentle sort of upheaval, quiet but complete. On the far side of the field lies a patch of woodland, and from there comes the deep smell of wet leaves and bark. The trees stand heavier now, each trunk darkened to near black. Moss glows faintly green when lightning stirs behind the clouds. The understory drips in 100 tiny patterns. Alabama landscapes in this period were shaped by clearing, farming, and expansion. Yet pockets of older growth remained around streams, margins, and rougher land. Such places could feel protective or threatening depending on the hour and the company. Tonight the woods seem watchful, holding their own rain, cooled silence beyond the reach of the plantation lamps. A small creek or branch nearby has begun to swell. You hear it before you see it, the water fuller and faster now, bumping against roots and stones. Heavy summer rain could raise southern creeks with surprising speed, muddying crossings and cutting off easy travel by morning. Planters worried about roads and wagons, enslaved families worried about gardens, cabins in low spots, and the added trouble a flooded path could bring to the next day's demands. The same rain fell on everyone. It did not burden everyone equally. You crouch near a row of young plants at the edge of a garden plot and notice how the soil is already crusted in some places and turned slick in others. Gardening in the south demanded constant attention to drainage, timing, insects, heat, and too much or too little rain. A quirky detail from agricultural writing of the era is how earnestly men could debate ditch depth and manure application as if discussing matters of state. One can almost hear the solemn pronouncements, "Sir, the fate of civilization hangs upon proper composting." Absurd, perhaps, until you remember how completely food and profit depended on these muddy details. The storm gives the plantation a certain false gentleness. Rain smooths harsh outlines. Darkness hides worn boards and tired faces. Distance erases the closer facts of labour, hunger, and power. A field under rain can look peaceful from afar. That is one of the deceptions of weather. It beautifies without correcting. The cotton rows drink, the roofs leak, the ditches fill. The people inside the cabin still carry the same burdens once the moonless clouds pass on. Beauty is present, yes, but it is not innocence, but it. Another pulse of lightning brightens the landscape for one clean instant. You see everything at once as if sketched in white. The rail fence, the line of cabins, the stable roof, a stand of trees bending slightly in the wind, the sheen of water on the road. Then darkness folds back in, and all of it becomes sound again. Rain on leaves, water running through the ditch, a horse stamping, frogs insisting on their operatic destiny. Near the lower field, you come across a patch where the rain has already begun to puddle between rows. The shallow pools reflect faint light from the distant house and cabins. The sight is oddly beautiful, though every planter who saw it would immediately begin estimating trouble. Too much standing water could damage roots, delay work, and worsen the mud by dawn. Cotton is a demanding crop and not especially sentimental. It does not care about atmosphere. It cares about conditions, and conditions tonight are mixed. The plantation's fences and lanes take on a different meaning in the storm. By day they guide labour and movement. By night under rain they become lines of sound. Water taps on rails, splashes through ruts, and streams off wheel tracks worn into the road. The clay lane that wagons use is already soft enough to hold a clear imprint. You imagine what morning wheels will do to it. Alabama roads in wet weather could become near impassable, especially for loaded carts. Travellers complained often. Complaining, to be fair, was one agricultural product the South produced in endless quantity. You notice the smell of the air shift again as the hour grows later. Early storm air had that charged metallic scent, bright and expectant. Now it smells darker and more settled. Wet bark, churned earth, cooling brick from the chimneys, a faint animal musk from the pens carried on the wind. Somewhere nearby, mint or pennyroyal has been crushed underfoot and lifts a sharp medicinal note above the heavier smells. It is the kind of layered night air that makes breathing feel almost like drinking from a cold cup. At the stable yard, a lantern moves once more. Someone is making another round, checking that doors remain latched and that runoff has not turned the entry into a swamp deep enough to trouble the animals by morning. In wet weather, attention must be repeated. One inspection is never quite enough. Human plans have to keep reasserting themselves against water, rot, rust, and simple bad luck. Historians still argue over how much autonomy skilled enslaved workers possessed in managing livestock, tools, and fields across different plantations. On some places their knowledge was indispensable and quietly acknowledged. On others it was used without any real trust. Either way, the storm reveals who understands the land in practice, not the person in the dry bed. Usually. You walk toward a stand of pines near the edge of the property and pause beneath their higher shelter. Rain falls differently here, first caught by needles, then released in delayed drops that strike the ground with heavier plops. The earth below is softer with old needles and smells richly resinous. Pine smoke from the cabins drifts this way in faint threads, mixing with the living scent of the trees. For a moment the whole plantation seems suspended between two textures of night, the open wet field and this darker, sheltered fringe. Insects return in waves as the rain eases slightly. Mosquitoes begin their thin hunting whine near the wetter ground. Moths throw themselves at lantern glow with hopeless conviction. Beetles blunder through the grass. The southern night never quite empties itself of life. It merely changes who is speaking. A bat darts overhead, invisible except for the sudden absence of one irritating insect. Bless that efficient little creature. You look back across the fields and see the main house and the quarters reduced to a scatter of lights. From this distance they almost appear equal, each a warm point against the rain. But distance lies. The same storm falls on every roof, yet the thickness of walls, the dryness of bedding, the fullness of stomachs, and the power to command tomorrow remain deeply unequal. A rainy night may blur the land, but it does not erase the structure built upon it. Still, there is a calming quality to the storm's persistence. It asks nothing clever of you. It simply falls. Roofs answer. Soil absorbs what it can. Ditches overflow. Leaves tremble. Animals settle in uneasy compromise. Human voices lower behind doors. The plantation, so busy with orders and effort by day, now submits to a slower authority. Weather becomes the largest sound in the world. It makes every plan provisional. You stand a little longer and let the field speak in its rainy language. Cotton leaves whisper. Fence rails drip. Creek water thickens and slides onward. Frogs pulse from the dark margins. Thunder has almost gone now, leaving only a low occasional murmur beyond the horizon. The night is not silent, but it is unified. Everything seems to belong to one great damp hush spread over the Alabama countryside. In that hush, the plantation appears both expansive and small, rich and fragile, orderly and forever at the mercy of mud, water, and the slow, patient work of the earth. The plantation grows quieter as the storm settles into a long, even fall, but quiet here never means ease. Night has a way of exposing worries that daylight keeps busy. Under darkness, every sound carries farther, and every silence seems to hold a question. You begin to sense how many different kinds of fear live on this land at once. Some are loud and practical, a leaking roof, a sick child, an animal loose in the yard. Others stay hidden under manners, under orders, under routine. Those are the fears that make the air feel tight even when the rain has cooled it. Near the main house, one lamp still burns in a back room. The glow is dim and steady, showing just enough movement behind a curtain to tell you someone remains awake. In prosperous households, nights were rarely as settled as the polished front room suggested. Illness, debt, strained marriages, and the endless labour of maintaining status all pressed against the edges of sleep. The planter class liked to imagine itself secure, but security in the cotton South was often theatrical. A good porch and a silver tea service could not keep out market swings, fever, or moral dread, no matter how elegantly arranged. You pass along the side of the house and hear voices through a shuttered window. They are low, tense, and careful not to rise. A man speaks in the clipped tone of someone counting problems rather than naming them. A woman answers with the controlled fatigue of someone who has heard these calculations before. Money is likely part of it. On many plantations, outward prosperity masked deep financial strain. Land, enslaved people, equipment, clothing, furniture, and crop advances were often entangled in debt. Historians still debate how many medium-sized plantations were truly stable from year to year, because owners had every reason to exaggerate success in letters and public life. Rain on the roof sounds much the same whether a household is solvent or nearly sinking. Beyond money lies another kind of anxiety, harder to confess even in private. Enslavers lived inside a system that required constant control, and constant control creates constant fear. Fear of resistance, fear of theft, fear of flight, fear of poison, fear of rebellion, even where no rebellion was brewing. Rumour did some of the work for them. Tales of uprisings moved through the South long after the events themselves, growing larger in retelling until ordinary gestures could be read as signs of danger. It is a peculiar sort of life, building power through domination, and then being haunted by the humanity of the people you are trying to dominate. At the edge of the yard, a dog lifts its head and gives a low warning growl toward the lane. Nothing appears at first, then you hear it, faint under the rain, hoofbeats, slow, measured, approaching from the road beyond the plantation. The sound changes the whole mood of the night. Even the dog seems to know that some visitors arrive wrapped in authority rather than welcome. A mounted patrol or local rider passes along the road, perhaps checking movement, perhaps simply returning home through the weather, perhaps enjoying the small theatre of being seen. Night patrols formed part of the wider system that enforced slavery in the South. White men rode roads, questioned travellers, demanded passes, and watched for gatherings or attempts to escape. Their presence extended plantation discipline far beyond the property line. You do not need to see the rider clearly to feel what that means. The hoofbeats alone are enough. In the quarters, a conversation pauses. In the stable yard, a lantern is turned slightly away. Inside a cabin, a child asks a question and receives no answer. The rider moves on. The sound fades. The rain fills the space it leaves behind, yet the tension remains in the muscles for a while, like the body has not been informed that the danger passed. Night teaches people to listen with their skin. Closer to the quarters, the fears are of a different order, though no less sharp. One cabin holds a person with fever. You can tell by the stillness around the bed and the careful way others move. A cup is lifted, a cloth is wrung out. The room smells of sweat, damp linen, herbs steeped in hot water, and fireplace ash. Illness in 1840 Alabama could turn frightening quickly. Malaria, respiratory infections, stomach diseases, and plain exhaustion all moved through households with alarming ease. For enslaved people, sickness carried an extra threat. Recovery was uncertain, treatment uneven, and time to rest often limited by the demands of labour. A cough in the night could sound like a prophecy no one wanted to hear. In another cabin, the fear is more practical and immediate. Rain has found the roof in 2 new places, and the bedding must be shifted again. A woman mutters under her breath while sliding a pallet away from the damp. The children, already half asleep, are confused and cross. One begins to cry from pure exhaustion. The mother hushes him, not impatiently, just with that thin edge of tiredness that comes when the body has nothing extra to spend. Shelter can fail by inches, and inches are enough to ruin a night's rest. You notice how many adults remain only partly asleep, even when lying down. One ear stays open for weather, one for sickness, one for movement outside. This watchfulness is its own burden. Under slavery, people often had to rest without ever being fully unguarded. Someone might be summoned, someone might be punished, someone might be sold, someone might be taken from family with little warning. Those possibilities do not vanish because rain sounds gentle. They settle into the mind until even calm nights contain a hard little knot of readiness. There are also quieter fears that rarely make noise at all. A mother worrying about a child growing old enough to be noticed for labour. A husband listening for any hint that his wife may be hired out, moved, or separated. An older person fearing the winter to come because joints already ache and blankets are never enough. A young woman dreading the unwanted attention of a white man with power over her future. Plantation life was filled with uncertainties that could not be solved by effort alone. You could work, obey, endure, and still lose everything that mattered. That knowledge darkens the rain in ways outsiders seldom understood, and yet fear does not have the whole night to itself. In one cabin, 2 older women sit close to the fire after the others have lain down. They speak quietly, their voices just above the rain. One is reciting names, family names, remembered names, people carried away, people born, people dead, people somewhere else on another plantation or maybe farther still. Memory here is a form of guarding. To remember someone is to refuse their complete erasure. The sound of those names, spoken into the wet dark, feels steadying, almost protective. A small superstition surfaces in another room. Someone places a certain object near a doorway, or adjusts it there with deliberate care. Perhaps it is a blue glass shard, perhaps a bundle, perhaps a mark made where few will notice. Scholars disagree about the meaning of some protective practices found in southern black communities during and after slavery, especially where African, Christian, and regional customs overlapped. Not every gesture left a written explanation, but the desire to shield a household from harm is universal, and on a stormy plantation night it feels especially understandable. When power is scarce, symbolism can become a shelter of its own. Near the main house, a different kind of night watch continues. An enslaved house servant remains awake in case the family needs water, medicine, or some other comfort that cannot apparently wait until morning. The hallway is dim except for one candle, and the boards feel cool through thin soles. The servant moves carefully, knowing that invisibility is praised until something goes wrong, at which point invisibility magically becomes negligence. The strange mathematics of service never rests. In the planter's study, a ledger may still lie open. Numbers can keep a man awake as effectively as thunder. Cotton prices, interest rates, notes due, repairs needed, land to buy, debts to press, debts to delay. The room smells of damp paper and stale tobacco. A candle gutters once and recovers. The man bending over the page might tell himself his worries are weighty, respectable, the burdens of responsibility. He is not entirely wrong, yet responsibility chosen is not the same as burden imposed, and that distinction hangs over the house whether anyone speaks it or not. Outside, the lane between cabins has gone nearly black, the mud holding only the faintest shine from scattered light. Frogs continue their ridiculous confidence from the ditch. Crickets have returned in thin metallic lines of sound. The storm itself has softened to a finer, steady rain, a curtain rather than a drum. Under that gentler weather, small noises become more vivid. A sleeper turning on corn husk ticking, a baby sighing in dreams, the creak of a rope bed, water dropping into a pan, a whisper cut short as someone finally drifts off. Then From somewhere beyond the quarters comes a sharp sound. Just one. A board knocked loose by wind, perhaps. A gate shifting. A branch falling. The effect is immediate. 2 dogs bark. A voice calls softly. Another answers. A lantern glows at a doorway for a minute, then disappears again once the source proves harmless. This is what life under strain does to the senses. It teaches overreaction because underreaction can cost dearly. Better to check. Better to lose a little sleep than miss the wrong sound. You move farther from the cabins and stand under a tree where the leaves catch the rain before releasing it in slow, heavy drops. The plantation looks subdued from here, almost peaceful. Light glows faintly from a few windows. Roof lines blur. The road beyond the fields has disappeared into darkness. It would be easy, from this distance, to imagine quiet as contentment. But the night is layered with vigilance. Someone fears the next debt notice. Someone fears the next fever. Someone fears the next order. Someone fears the next patrol. Someone fears being forgotten. Someone fears being noticed too much. Still, the human mind does strange generous things in the dark. It makes room for prayer, for jokes whispered under a blanket, for remembering a mother's face, for imagining a place beyond the road, for deciding that tomorrow's trouble belongs to tomorrow for at least 1 more hour. Even fear needs rest eventually. The air cools further as the rain continues, and the plantation seems to exhale. Shutters stop rattling, animals settle. The final active voices go quiet one by one. A woman in a doorway looks out into the dark for a long moment, then closes the door softly. A servant upstairs lowers the flame of a candle. In the quarters, the last ember is nudged into a safer place. The night watch does not end exactly, but it grows more inward. Alertness curls up inside sleeping bodies like a small guarded flame. You remain still and listen to the softened world. Rain on leaves, water slipping through the ditch, one distant horse moving in straw. A cough, then silence. The plantation is full of sleeping and not sleeping, of comfort and fear sharing the same narrow rooms. Nothing in the storm can wash that contradiction away. Yet for this hour, with the road quiet and the roofs holding, the fears that prowled openly have retreated to the edges. They remain present, certainly. But the night has drawn a thin veil over them, enough for tired bodies to try once more for rest. At last the plantation begins to surrender to sleep. Not all at once, but body by body, room by room, as if the whole place is slowly loosening its grip on the day. Rain keeps falling with a steady, almost intimate softness, the kind that fills every pause and smooths every edge. You feel it in the atmosphere, even indoors. The air is cooler now, though still damp, and the smell of wet earth presses gently through every crack and doorway. This is the hour when exhaustion stops negotiating. However rough the bedding, however uncertain the roof, the body insists on lying down. Inside the cabins, sleep has to be built as carefully as supper. A blanket is shaken out. A pallet is nudged farther from the draught. A child is turned so little feet no longer stick from the edge of the cover. Someone checks the bowl beneath the leak and slides it an inch because the drops have changed direction. The room glows low with ember light, just enough to turn faces bronze and red in the dark. Shadows rise and fold against the wall. The fire has settled into a patient bed of coals, warm but no longer lively, and every sound seems larger beside it. You notice the texture of everything now. A quilt patched from many scraps, some soft with age, some rougher where newer cloth has been added. A cornhusk mattress rustling when someone shifts position. A wool blanket slightly scratchy against the neck. A wooden floor cool under bare feet for one last trip across the room. A rolled-up garment tucked beneath the head in place of a proper pillow. The body reads these things with great seriousness at night. Comfort in 1840 was often a matter of degree. not abundance. A dry corner, a bit of warmth, a layer between your skin and the boards. These could feel like luxuries. Several children are already asleep in the untidy, total way only children can manage. One lies with an arm thrown above the head, mouth open to the softest little breath. Another has drifted sideways across a pallet until a patient adult eases the small body back into a more sensible position. A baby makes those brief fluttering noises between dreams and waking, then settles again against a mother's side. The smell around them is warm and familiar, smoke in cloth. Clean skin where washing was possible. Damp hair dried by the fire. The faint, sour sweetness of milk. Sleep, even in hard conditions, has its own domestic perfume. The adults take longer. One man lowers himself onto bedding with that careful, measured motion of someone whose muscles have stiffened in places he no longer mentions. A woman sits first on the edge, rubbing one foot with both hands before she stretches out. Another person coughs, clears the throat, then pulls a blanket over the shoulder against the cooling air. The room is nearly still but not silent. Bed cords creak. Corn husk, ticking whispers. Rain ticks at the roof. Water drops into the bowl by the wall. Outside, frogs continue their damp little hymn from the ditch, full of confidence and utterly innocent of human fatigue. You become aware of how sleeping arrangements reveal both necessity and affection. People lie where space allows, but they also arrange themselves by instinct. The child with fever stays closest to the one who will wake easiest. The smallest sleeper is tucked between safer bodies. An elder receives the better blanket if the household can spare it. A mother keeps one hand resting lightly on a child's back, even after her own eyes close. There is tenderness in these placements, and strategy too. When a room is crowded, love often looks like practical geometry. Rain finds the roof again, but gently this time. Not the alarming new leak of earlier hours, just a scattered tapping overhead and a soft run down the outer wall. The sound becomes almost hypnotic. One section of roof gives a low patter. Another produces a quicker, sharper tapping where the boards are thinner. Near the chimney the rain seems to hiss faintly as droplets strike warmer brick. The combination is so steady that you can feel your own breathing trying to match it. Storm sounds have done this to people for centuries. They take the untidy pace of worry and smooth it toward rest. In the big house, sleep arrives differently, but it arrives with its own compromises. Upstairs bedrooms hold larger bedsteads, feather mattresses if the household is fortunate, curtains or netting to ward off insects, and sheets that feel cooler and finer against the skin. Yet even here the rain inserts itself. The air remains humid. Linen clings faintly to the wrist. A shutter knocks until someone rises to secure it. Mosquitoes whine near the bed curtains with villainous dedication. Comfort may be better upholstered in the main house, but nature still slips its little inconveniences into the room with impressive persistence. A child in the big house, not fully asleep, listens to the rain and imagines shapes in the ceiling shadows. A woman turns her pillow to the cooler side and closes her eyes again. Somewhere a man breathes heavily already, fatigue or habit making quick work of moral complexity. Another room stays wakeful longer because the occupant is listening for a feverish child, or for a servant called in the night, or simply because the mind has taken a dislike to rest. Wealth improves bedding more reliably than it improves conscience. In the quarters, sleep remains lighter. The body lies down, but part of it keeps watch. This is not merely habit, it is training laid into muscle by uncertainty. A creak outside, a sudden cough, a child's cry, a shift in the weather, any of it can pull a person back to wakefulness in an instant. Historians have long noted how enslaved people were denied privacy, stability, and control over time itself. That denial reached into the night. Rest existed, but rarely with the full innocence of safety. Even so, people slept. Human beings can adapt to almost anything, which is both a marvel and a tragedy. A scholarly uncertainty lingers around the exact material details of bedding across plantations, because records often describe issue rather than lived use. A ledger might note blankets or cloth distributed. A visitor might make a broad claim about cabin conditions. Neither tells you how a pallet actually felt at midnight in damp weather after 12 hours of labour. Archaeology, memoir, and surviving narratives help, but they never align perfectly. What seems clear is variety within hardship. Some cabins had bedsteads, some more pallets, some a mix of both. Some families managed extra quilts, some did not. Sleep depended not only on what was given, but on what was made, mended, borrowed, saved, or sacrificed for another. You hear a soft murmur from one corner of a cabin and realise someone is praying under the breath. Not a dramatic prayer, just a few words folded into the dark, spoken so quietly that the rain nearly keeps them to itself. In another room, someone hums once or twice and then stops, as if the tune finished the thought better than language could. Night often draws out the most private forms of belief. They do not always need an audience. A quirky little truth of shared sleeping space is that every room develops its own nighttime orchestra. One sleeper sighs, another snores in short, determined bursts. A child makes little clicking noises with the tongue. Someone turns over and the mattress gives a whole speech about it. An ember collapses in the hearth with a dusty breath. From the big house may come the faintest ring of glass shifting on a washstand as thunder murmurs far away. From the stable, an occasional stomp. From the chicken roost, one indignant rustle. The plantation sleeps, but it does not go mute. The smell of the night grows deeper as the hours pass. Early rain smelled bright and alive. Midnight rain smells settled, wet clay, cooling ash, pine needles, damp wool, brick that has lost the day's heat. Somewhere mint or some crushed herb still lifts above the heavier scents with a cool, sharp note. Breathing it in feels calming, almost medicinal. The air brushes your face with that rare combination of chill and softness that comes only after a proper southern storm. You stand near a cabin doorway and watch a woman, still half awake, reach out once more to check the placement of a bowl catching a leak. She does it without opening her eyes fully. That small motion tells you everything about repetition. Weather has done this before. The body has learned. So much of plantation life depended on bodily knowledge carried without fanfare. How to bank a fire low enough to last. How to settle children quickly. How to lie so that the draft catches someone else's feet instead of the baby's. How to sleep near others without elbowing them awake. Civilization likes to congratulate itself on grand inventions. Yet on nights like this, survival is built from inches and instincts. Farther along, one cabin is completely dark except for the softest ember light, and still you can feel the people inside as surely as if you saw them. Sleep has its own atmosphere. It fills a room, changes the shape of silence, alters the weight of the air. In crowded housing, sleeping bodies create warmth together. Shared breath turning the room close and faintly damp. It can be comforting or stifling depending on the season and the size of the room. Tonight, with the rain cooling the outside, the closeness feels more blessing than burden. In the main house, a servant may be sleeping lightly in a side room or on a pallet near the nursery, ready to rise if called. House servants often lived in a strange borderland between indoors and outdoors. Proximity and distance, visibility and erasure. Their nights could be interrupted by a sick child, a late request, a spilled pitcher, a nightmare, a lamp left burning too low. Even sleep under a better roof was still service if it could be summoned away at any moment. The storm slackens for a little while, and in that thinner rain you can hear distant creek water moving through the dark. The sound is low and continuous, like fabric being drawn slowly over wood. A barred owl calls once from the trees and is answered by nothing. Then the rain returns a little stronger, and the world closes back in around the roofs. You almost lose the separate sounds again beneath the single soft sweep of water. A final few sleepers resist. One child whispers a question that receives no reply because the adults are already too far inside their own fatigue. A young man turns over and stares at the roof a little longer, listening to the rain and to thoughts he cannot still quickly. A woman with a sick family member keeps waking after only a few minutes, reaching automatically to check skin temperature in the dark. Rest comes unevenly, but it comes. By the deepest part of the night, the plantation has settled into a layered stillness. The big house rests behind shuttered windows and dimmed candles. The cabins hold clusters of sleeping bodies under patched quilts and worn blankets. Animals in the stable shift less often. The kitchens are dark, the study is closed. Even the patrol road beyond the field seems to have been washed temporarily out of the world. Rain remains the great surrounding sound. A patient hand on every roof. You stay with that sound and let it fill the dark. The downpour has become a cradle and a warning, a comfort and a reminder all at once. On this Alabama night in 1840, sleep is never simple, never entirely secure, yet it is deeply human, beneath rough boards, under finer plaster, beside children, beside worry, beside hunger, beside habit. Bodies finally yield to the oldest need they know. They settle into quilts, husks, feathers, rope beds, pallets, and prayer. While the gentle storm keeps speaking over the plantation, steady as breath, until even vigilance begins to dream. Sleep does not arrive as a clean curtain dropping over the plantation. It comes in layers, with drifting, stirring, half-waking, and the strange inner travel of tired minds. On a rainy Alabama night, the sounds outside do not stop when eyes close. They sink into the body and become part of sleep itself. Rain tapping the roof becomes footsteps in a dream. Thunder far away becomes a wagon crossing a bridge, or a river moving through memory, or the slow beating of a heart that cannot quite settle. You stand in that deep hour when most bodies are lying down, yet the hidden life of the night has only just begun. Inside the cabins, the ember light has grown lower, turning the room into shapes and breathing rather than clear objects. A hand lies open on a blanket. A child's foot peeks from beneath a quilt. The bowl catching the leak still gives an occasional bright note when a drop lands. In such dimness, the sleeping face looks younger, no matter the age. Labour loosens for a few hours. Lines of worry soften. The body slips beyond duty into something more private. Dreams, after all, belong to no master. You begin to sense how crowded sleep can be with longing. In one cabin, a woman turns in her rest and murmurs a name. Perhaps the name of someone absent. Perhaps a parent far away. Perhaps a child sold or hired out. Perhaps a place remembered from years before. Separation haunted plantation life with terrible regularity. Families were divided by sale, transfer, hiring, inheritance, marriage arrangements made by owners, and all the casual violences of the market. Records often note such movement in a flat business tone. The human mind did not experience it flatly. At night, distance reopened. The missing returned in fragments, in voices, in unfinished embraces, in dreams that briefly repaired what daylight could not. Another sleeper smiles faintly in the dark, the smallest passing change, gone almost before you see it. Perhaps a dream has gone somewhere kinder. The mind is stubborn that way, even under oppression. It keeps making gardens, feasts, reunions, and roads out of whatever scraps of memory it can gather. A person who went hungry may dream of food. A person held in place may dream of walking. A mother exhausted by worry may dream of her child already grown and safe. There is no archive full enough to catch these private night journeys. Official history usually stops at the cabin door and loses interest once the eyes close. A child gives a little laugh in sleep, then stills. You wonder what enters a child's dream on a night like this. Not history as historians define it, not economics or law, likely something immediate and bright, a chicken escaping the yard, a dog chasing its own tail, a rabbit too clever to be caught, a sweet cake larger than a bucket, or perhaps fear enters there too, dressed in smaller forms. Children on plantations learned early that the world could change without warning. Yet childhood remains inventive. It tucks wonder into tight places. Rain continues its patient music overhead, and the rhythm seems to guide the dream life of the whole settlement. In one room, someone wakes briefly, listens, and falls back under. In another, a mother shifts closer to a child without ever fully waking, as though the body itself has learned to keep company while asleep. A man troubled by pain in his back changes position and lets out a breath through clenched teeth before drifting again. The night is not motionless. It ripples. Dreams in the big house differ in texture, though not always in peace. A planter may sleep badly beneath a better blanket. Numbers from the ledger can follow a man into his dreams more faithfully than his virtues do. He may imagine spoiled cotton, unpaid notes, a horse gone lame, a market turned, a field drowned, a rival thriving, a creditor arriving with politeness sharp as a knife. Wealth brings its own nocturnal theatre, though it is difficult to feel much pity for anxiety cushioned by feather bedding and service bell cords. Upstairs, a woman in the main house might dream of a northern parlour from her youth, or of music, or of a child recovered from fever, or of the social world she's expected to maintain with charm and composure. Planter women often lived in a narrowing contradiction, tasked with refinement while helping administer a brutal household order. Some accepted that role fully, some suffered within it, some moved between both positions without naming the conflict. Sleep does not always resolve what daylight avoids, it merely rearranges it into symbol and image. In the quarters, dreams also carry older inheritances. Not every spiritual memory vanishes when written records fail to preserve it. Songs, gestures, stories, naming practices, protective customs, and ways of interpreting dreams travelled through generations in altered form. Scholars still debate how directly certain African beliefs about ancestors, spirit presence, and dream meaning survived in different parts of the American South. The evidence is uneven, and much of it comes filtered through outsiders who did not know what they were seeing. Even so, enough remains to suggest that dreams were not always treated as meaningless. For some, a dream could comfort, warn, visit, or confirm. You can imagine a sleeper waking in the dark after a vivid dream and lying very still, listening to the rain while deciding what to do with what was seen. Tell no one, tell a sister in the morning, treat it as a sign, treat it as grief with a mask on. The mind at night is both inventive and sincere. It can bring nonsense, memory, hope, and dread, all in the same hour. A quirky little truth about sleeping communities is how dreams sometimes pass from one body to another through sound alone. One person begins talking in sleep, and someone else, barely awake, folds that voice into the edge of a dream. A baby stirs, and the nearby sleeper begins dreaming of searching for something small and warm. Rain on the roof becomes a river in 3 different minds at once. The whole cabin drifts together, not into the same dream exactly, but into related weather. In one darker room, an elder lies awake longer than the others. Age has thinned sleep. The old often carry night differently, resting in fragments rather than stretches. This person looks toward the dying coals and listens with a face gone thoughtful in the half-light. Perhaps sleep will come. Perhaps memory is stronger tonight. Old age on a plantation could bring a terrible mix of authority, vulnerability, usefulness, and threat. Elders held knowledge and family history, but they also faced bodily decline in a world that valued labour first. Their dreams, when they came, may have been full of roads already walked twice. You step back into the lane and let the rain touch your face. The plantation is nearly all dark now, just a few low lights left breathing under doors or in distant windows. The fields are invisible, the road has vanished, the world has become roof lines, trees, and the wet hush between them. It is easy to imagine, for one dangerous moment, that the place is peaceful, but the sleeping mind knows better than appearances do. Anxiety seeps into dreams as surely as rain seeps through a weak roof. A young mother, finally asleep, may dream of losing sight of her child in a crowd. A man may dream of running and getting nowhere, feet heavy as clay. Another may dream of standing before an owner unable to speak. That old nightmare of powerlessness dressed in different clothes. Dreams do not always free. Sometimes they continue the work of fear by other means, yet even then, the dream gives shape to what daylight forces inward. There is honesty in that. Elsewhere the mind turns toward escape. Not always literal escape, though sometimes surely that, to dream of a road, a boat, a pass, a horse, a guide through the woods, a town where no one knows your name, such things would hardly be surprising. Enslaved people imagined freedom in practical and imaginative ways both. Plans could be whispered, rumours could be traded, hopes could be hidden, and in sleep, the impossible became briefly ordinary. You walk through the gate, you cross the creek, you keep walking. No one calls you back. For a few dream moments, the body learns another future. The rain softens further, becoming a fine constant silver hiss. With thunder mostly gone, smaller sounds rise to the surface, a sleeper humming once through the nose, a board settling in the damp, water slipping off a leaf in heavy delayed drops. From the stable, one quiet thud of a hoof meeting wood. These sounds thread through the dream life of the plantation like stitching through cloth, holding the night together. One cabin holds a person who cannot quite sleep at all. The body is down, eyes closed, but the mind keeps circling. Thoughts have become too sharp. Perhaps the day's insult is replaying. Perhaps tomorrow's labour is already being felt in the bones. Perhaps some private sorrow has chosen this hour to expand. Insomnia is not modern. It belongs perfectly well to 1840, especially where fear and fatigue live side by side. The rain offers company, but not always relief. From the main house comes the faintest glimmer of a candle lit again. Perhaps for medicine, perhaps for a restless child, perhaps for a grown person defeated by wakefulness. The servant who rises to tend it does so quietly, feet practised on the boards, face composed from habit. Even the sleeplessness of the wealthy often borrowed labour from someone else. The deepest emotional life of a plantation rarely survives in clean sentences. Ledgers tell you what was bought, letters tell you what their writers wished to present, newspapers tell you what a region wanted said aloud. But dreams, the place where longing speaks without permission, almost never leave direct evidence. You have to infer them from songs, stories, recollections, fragments of testimony, and the broad human truths that endure across time. People dream of who they miss. They dream of what they fear. They dream of what they want so badly that the mind rehearses having it. Under slavery, that want could become vast. A sudden brighter flash behind the clouds whitens the cracks around a cabin door. For 1 second the room inside is gently outlined. Quilts, shelf, hanging shirt, sleeping shoulders. Then darkness settles again. No one fully wakes. The storm has become familiar enough to enter the body as background. That is one of night's small miracles. Repetition turns disturbance into cradle. Toward the last part of the night, sleep deepens for some and loosens for others. Dreams thin. The body edges closer to morning without yet knowing it. In one room, a child curls tighter into a blanket as the air cools another degree. In another, an elder finally slips into the sleep that refused to come earlier. Somewhere, someone dreams of sunlight on dry ground, and does not yet know whether that is memory or prophecy. You remain there in the rainy dark, listening to the plantation breathe in sleep, beneath patched roofs and better roofs, on pallets and bedsteads, under quilts, blankets, and netting. Minds move through private landscapes no overseer can fully enter. Some wander toward home, some toward freedom, some toward fear, some toward simple pleasures, a full table, a lost song, a hand once held. The rain keeps its steady whisper above them all, and for these few hours the deepest truths of the night are hidden not in the fields or ledgers, but in the unseen dreams of those who endure beneath the roof. By the last stretch of the night the rain has changed again. What fell for hours in steady silver curtains now comes lighter, finer, more like a drifting veil than a storm. The plantation lies in that strange hour before dawn when darkness is still complete, yet something in the air has started to loosen. You can feel morning preparing itself long before you see it. The frogs continue from the ditches, though less triumphantly now. Insects thin out. The roofs no longer drum so much as whisper. Water still slips from eaves and tree branches, but the great force of the weather has passed. What remains is aftermath. The ground has taken the storm into itself. Every path is slick. The red clay lane shines black in the dimness. Puddles sit in wagon ruts like narrow pools of ink. The kitchen garden smells rich and bruised, leaves bent under the weight of water. Along the fences, droplets gather at the rails and let go one by one. The air feels newly washed, cool against the face, carrying wet pine, chimney soot, soaked earth, and that faint iron scent clay releases after a proper rain. It is one of the loveliest smells in the world, though loveliness, as always here, does not mean mercy. The cabins remain mostly dark. Inside, sleep holds on where it can. The deepest sleepers are still gone from the room in that merciful way only fatigue can grant. Others are drifting near the surface now, tugged by habit toward waking even before the sky gives permission. One woman opens her eyes for a moment, listening. No child is crying. The roof is holding well enough. The feverish breathing from the corner has not worsened. She closes her eyes once more and steals a final stretch of rest while she can. Such moments are tiny and precious, the sort of wealth no banker could count. In another cabin, an older man is already awake. He does not rise yet. He lies still beneath a thin blanket, feeling the coolness in the room and listening to the last soft rain on the roof. Early waking belongs especially to those who have lived a long time with labour. The body learns the hour so thoroughly that no clock is needed. His breathing is slow. One hand rests on his chest. Perhaps he is praying. Perhaps he is simply listening to the weather and measuring what sort of morning it will be. The mind does a great deal of quiet work before the feet ever touch the floor. Near the hearth, the coals are almost gone. A child turns in sleep and rustles the corn husk ticking. Another gives a small morning groan, the universal sound of a body realizing that a new day is lurking nearby. Someone reaches out from under a quilt and tucks the blanket edge over the child's shoulder without speaking. The room smells softer now than in the evening. Less food, less smoke, more damp cloth, sleeping skin, cooled ashes, and rain-washed air sneaking through the cracks. In the big house, morning announces itself differently but just as certainly. A servant rises first, or nearly first, moving quietly through a hallway dim with the last of candlelight, or the first grey leak of dawn. The boards are cool, the basin water is colder than anyone would prefer. Curtains must be shifted, fires coaxed back, breakfast begun, boots located, wet garments checked, and the business of presenting another orderly day started before the family fully wakes. Comfort, even now, requires advance labour. The house may seem to open naturally into morning. It does no such thing. You step outside into the washed darkness and see that the plantation has changed shape overnight. The harsh dust of the day before is gone. Leaves shine. The packed yard has become a patchwork of mud and shallow reflection. Outbuildings sit dark and damp, edges softened by mist. The stable roof drips in a slow, patient pattern. A dog noses the air and shakes water from its coat with an expression of ancient disappointment. One chicken, stepping gingerly out from shelter, appears personally offended that the world is wet underfoot. The bird is not wrong. Farther out, the fields are beginning to emerge from darkness. The cotton rows do not yet look green. They look almost blue-black in the weak early light, laid out in long wet lines. Water clings to every leaf. The ditches are fuller. A low patch holds standing water between the rows, and that will mean trouble or at least complaint by daylight. The crop is still there. The land is still there. The demands of labour are still there. Rain has refreshed the air, but it has not changed the terms of the world. This is the great tension of dawn on a plantation. Morning always carries a little innocence in its light, especially after rain. Birds begin again. Mist rises from the ground in pale ribbons. Trees seem cleaner, almost forgiving. The sky in the east lifts from black to deep grey, then to a colour like watered silk. For a few minutes, the whole property looks hushed and almost tender. But morning tenderness is visual. The social order underneath it remains hard as iron. From one cabin comes the first deliberate stir of waking work. A woman kneels at the hearth and nudges the banked coals, coaxing a hidden orange back to life. She blows gently. Ash lifts. A small flame answers. The smell changes at once, warming from cold soot to fresh smoke and kindling. Another person pulls on damp, stiff clothing that never fully dried. Fabric sticks at the cuffs. A child is shaken awake and protests with limp dignity. No one has the luxury of taking offence at morning. Morning is coming regardless. Soon the quarters begin to rouse in uneven waves. A door opens. Someone steps out barefoot and instantly regrets the mud. A bucket is lifted. A face is splashed with cold water from a basin. A cough sounds from one room and a laugh from another. Voices remain low, not yet ready for the full day. The rain has reduced everything to essentials: wet wood, cool air, chilled fingers, stiff backs, breath rising faintly in the damp dawn. Breakfast, where there is time and material for it, will be plain and quick. Leftover bread, cornmeal mush, perhaps a bit of bacon fat worked into something, coffee substitute or weak coffee where the household has it, a swallow of water, on plantations. The transition from sleep to labour was often brutally short, especially for enslaved field hands whose bodies had barely finished yesterday's demands. The softened beauty of dawn did not spare anyone the schedule. At the big house, shutters open one by one, light begins to show in upper windows. A servant empties a basin, another carries in wood or kindling. The kitchen wakes louder than the main rooms, because kitchens are honest that way. Pots shift. Fire catches. The scent of breakfast starts to build. Corn cakes, biscuit dough, coffee, ham, or whatever the pantry and habit provide. Someone upstairs does not wish to rise and says so. Someone below has been up long enough to resent hearing it. The planter himself, if he steps out early, will read the land first through utility. Are the roads passable? Did the creek rise too far? How much standing water sits in the low field? Will work be delayed? Can the wagons move? Is the fence line intact? Morning after rain is a ledger written in mud. It tells on every weakness. A broken latch, a washed ditch, a roof leak, a garden drowned at the corner. The land speaks plainly to anyone willing to look. Yet the people who often understand this damp morning best are not the people most likely to claim mastery over it. Enslaved workers know exactly which path will suck a shoe off, which shed roof always leaks first, which mule hates puddles, which patch of ground hides slippery roots, which cabin wall needs another board before the next storm, which garden rows have survived, and which won't. Practical knowledge sits in the body, in feet and hands and eyes trained by repetition. Historians still argue about how often planters acknowledged this expertise openly, but the plantation could not function without it. You walk toward the edge of the field as the light gathers. Birds begin in the trees, tentative at first, then bolder. A mockingbird tries a phrase. Sparrows fuss in the brush. Somewhere a rooster finally commits himself to the morning with theatrical certainty, as though he alone has pulled the sun over Alabama. Mist lifts from the low ground in slow sheets. Water in the ruts catches the growing light and turns silver. The beauty is undeniable, so is the weariness beneath it. A strange little detail of southern mornings after rain is how sound changes. The world feels clearer. Hoofsteps carry sharply over wet ground. Voices seem to travel farther. A bucket set down on a porch sounds crisp as a bell. A gate latch clicks with importance. Even the tearing of bread in a kitchen can sound distinct through damp air. Everything has been scrubbed by the weather into sharp relief. It makes the morning feel almost ceremonial, though the ceremony serves labour rather than leisure. In one cabin, a sick person is checked again in the new light. Fever has eased a little, or perhaps it has not. A forehead is touched. A cup is raised. The day begins there, not with field orders, but with care. In another, a mother smooths a child's hair and ties a worn garment with quick fingers before turning to her own tasks. In another, someone sits for 1 extra second on the edge of the bed, eyes closed, gathering strength like a person drawing water from a deep well. The heroism of ordinary mornings almost never gets named. The storm has left marks everywhere. Washed gullies near the lane, straw blown from a shed, a branch down near the fence, mud tracked onto porch boards, the bowl beneath the cabin leak nearly full. These are small damages in one sense. In another, they are the texture of life itself. Nothing on the plantation stays settled for long. Heat frays, rain swells, wind loosens, bodies tire, supplies run low, repairs lag, and still each day begins again as if this were normal. Of course, it is for the people living it. There is no grand revelation in this dawn, no sudden justice shining over the wet fields. The rain has washed the leaves and cooled the air, but it has not washed away bondage, hierarchy, debt, fear, or grief. The plantation wakes into the same system it slept under. That is the hardest truth of the morning. A beautiful sky can rise over an ugly order with no sense of contradiction at all. And yet dawn has a quiet generosity. It offers clean air to tired lungs. It gives 1 moment of bird song before commands begin. It lays a silver softness over puddles and roof lines. It lets children wake with sleep still on their faces before discipline hardens the day. It allows 1 deep breath at the doorway, 1 glance at the mist, 1 private thought held close before the world starts counting labour again. Such moments are brief, but they are real. The sun itself does not fully appear all at once. It seeps into the sky through cloud, turning grey to pearl and pearl to a pale gold washed thin by the remaining mist. The wet cotton leaves brighten. Tree trunks separate from shadow. The cabins become more fully themselves again. Rough boards, patched roofs, smoke starting fresh from chimneys. The big house loses some of its nighttime glow and stands plainly in the morning. Not magical now, just large. You remain in that cool, damp dawn as the plantation steps back into motion. Doors open wider. Fires wake. Animals call for feed. Buckets move. Shoes sink into mud. Breakfast is swallowed. The road begins to remember itself. Another day gathers shape. The storm is over, but its softness lingers for a little while in the washed air and the glistening ground, like a final kindness the world offered, without asking who deserved it. Now the morning settles into certainty. Work will resume. Clothing will dry or fail to. Fields will be checked. Children will be gathered. Orders will be given. Meals will be planned from what remains. A roof will need mending. A ditch will need clearing. The body will be spent again by evening. But for this fading edge of dawn, the plantation rests in a pause between rain and labour, between darkness and command, between dream and duty. Let yourself stay there a little longer. The air is cool on your skin. Water still purls along the fence rails. Somewhere a bird keeps singing into the thin gold light. Smoke rises from the first rekindled fires in slow blue threads. The ground smells rich and clean, full of leaves, clay, pine, and ash. The night has passed. The storm has gone quiet. All across the wet Alabama landscape, roofs glisten, puddles shine, and tired souls step gently into another day. And as the light grows softer and steadier, you can let the details blur. The dripping eaves, the damp fields, the chimneys breathing smoke into the pale morning, the last cool breath of rain lingering in the trees, the far call of birds over soaked cotton rows, the low hush of water moving through the ditch and out toward the creek. Let it all grow distant now. Picture the plantation not as a place of demands, but as a quiet rain-washed scene fading into mist. The roofs grow dimmer, the mud paths soften, the windows lose their sharp edges. The voices become murmurs too far away to follow. The whole landscape settles under a gentle veil of morning cloud, calm and silver and still. You do not need to carry the weight of the day with you. You can leave the wet yard, the cool cabins, the fields, the trees, and the low drifting smoke exactly where they are. Let the rain scent fade. Let the birds grow faint. Let the road disappear into soft grey light. Let the final drops slip from the leaves and vanish into the earth. Now there's only the quiet, only the cool air, only the last hush after storm. Rest there for a moment longer, where the night has ended and the day has not fully begun, where everything is softened by distance, and the world grows gentle enough to sleep beside.